it already got a kesem. That's Yesh Mi Rabbi say. That's what some of the Rabbi say of the Rashba says. V'lo nidali kain. The Rashba says, I don't hold to that. אלא כל שבדקוסי בין היא בין חבר ונדע שניחתם בוי קסם מצד אחר ולא יברוס משוק של טבחים ולא בצד המססקים מקסם, הרי זה בחזקס בודוק. As long as you checked it and then it didn't go through a scenario where it could have gotten a kesem, even if you lost eye contact with it, it's still considered a Eid HaBoduk. And then Teres Abai Sa'ar, he brings Teres Abai Sa'ar, which is also from the Rashba, and he brings over there, who's the Shitta which says that, who's the Yesh Mi Rabbi say, is the Shitta of the Ramban. And then what he explains, and then how he explains why it's not so. Yeah, what does he say over there? He says, he explains, so what's a H.A. Boduk? We know what a Boduk is, that you checked it and it didn't go through a scenario of Ksamim, where it could have gotten Ksamim. Or H.A. Boduk is that you have the bdikas which are prepared. You have the bdikas prepared. Today you buy them in a bag. It's in the bag, it's prepared. It's ready. And then you take it out of that bag, you take it out of the place where it's supposed to remain, where the safe place for it is, and then you're not sure if you went through a place of ksamim or whatever it is, then it's no longer a aid she'enoi boduk. If some time passed, or if it's already there, it was checked, you put it aside, but you didn't look at it for a long time, it's also considered a she'enoi boduk. Yeah, so now we're going to go to the beginning of this topic, which is Sif Lamed Gimel Lamed Daled, I'm going to discuss today, which is Eid HaBoduk. Gimel Lamed Daled Lamed Hey. So as we said, when it comes to an Eid, we said we're more machmir than a beged or a sadin that's Boduk. The Shulchan Aruch says, Afilu tipo kechardol ben ogel ben moshuch tmeya. She made a bdike and she finds even a drop tipas dam kechardol, whether it's ogel, it's round, whether it's moshuch, whether it's pulled down, it's considered she is tamei. Why is the importance of differentiation between ogel and moshuch? We're going to see later that ogel, certain scenarios, we look at it that probably was a bug, this ma'achoilas that got crushed. It makes a round blood. It's mashuch, means that it was in the body and the blood went in a certain way. Not only that, even if you see a dead ma'achoilas on this aid, and under it you see this round blood, we still say she's tamei. Yeah, why is that so? The Alter Rebbe is going to explain in a second. So we have, the Alter Rebbe explains what is it, why when you find a ma'achoilas. Yeah, first let's say, so what's over here, why? Because in a general kesem, the differentiation between the kesem and here by regular kesem, we have two sfeikas. First suffix, maybe it came from her body. Yeah, maybe it didn't come from her body. And even if it came from her body, maybe there wasn't argosha. If there wasn't argosha, she's not tamei midaraisa. By a bdika, first of all, you have a suffix, maybe there was argosha, so it becomes a suffix deraisa. And also, you don't have a suffix megufo. You did a bdika, so it's vadei megufo. So unless you have that it's not megufo, you have to say your both sfeikas are gone, and therefore we are machmer. Now, what happens if you find, why does the Shulchan Aruch say if you find a ma'achoilas, it's still considered tamei? L'chayra, you have a bdika with thread, you have a ma'achoilas on top of it. Why don't you say that it's toir? So you say, first of all, ma'achoilas are not mitzuyos in that area of the body. But more so, the way he explains is, the dam came. Alter Rebbe explains it is that the ma'achoilas came alma. V'oisam me'ucho kvar koydem shenoflo olav. V'dam zeh eino ela moise mokim. The blood came from the body. The machoilas was crushed elsewhere, and it fell over there on top of this bdika, and therefore we cannot rely on this machoilas to be matir this bdika. Now, just to point out an important point, there's a bunch of kulas that we use by ksamim. Heard something sheni mekabel tuma, tzavua. It's different kulas we use by ksamim. When you do a bdika, not always could you apply these kulas. Something which is not mekabel tuma, you do a bdika with it, still a problem. If it's white and you see blood, you still have the same issues. You don't have the kula of you have by ksamim. When it comes to colorful, it's a shaila, because what's the reason why by colorful? The Alter Rebbe explains to you the reason why by colors we're mekel. It's because you can't tell the reality of the blood. But lu yitzur, you will be able to tell that there was blood there. Should become tamei by a bdika, even if it's not something which is kabel tuma and something which is color. That's a kesem, it's not a bdika. Because the chachamim established that kesem were mekel.
Even if you can tell for sure.
Can't tell. Well, Alter Rebbe tells you metzias. You can't tell on color.
So line of bdika, yeah.
You have to see if you put it on something else. Maybe you will be able to tell. But we don't have to look for it. By a bdika, the default position is it's a problem, unless we could figure out a way why it's not a problem. By a kesem, the default position is it's mutter, unless we know that it's a problem. This is all by regular bdikas. But what happens now if it continues over there? Shebotka boy v'nichosi bekufsa. She checked it. She made a bdika. Then she didn't look at it. She put it into a box, which is a safe place where there's no bugs. Ve'achar sho botkoi soyumotzol of dam kol shehu. And then afterwards she checked it and she did find blood in it. Bein shu moshuch, bein ogel tamei. It doesn't make a difference what shape it is. She is tamei. Why is that? Alter Rebbe explains to you, because in the kufsa is a place where you don't have these machoilus and steady, regularly present, and therefore you can't be telling the machoilus. But if it would have been b'mokim megula, then if you cannot be telling the machoilus, you're back to the same situation as a kufsa. But if you could be tailored, then it could be tailored machoilus, then we have a swara to be makel. That is in the box. Now what happens? There comes Sif Lamedalid. She did a bdika. She didn't keep it, she didn't look at it. It was at night. She decided she's going to look at it the next morning. Where did she keep it? She put it under a pillow, under the blanket. And then the next day she found blood. Over here we say as follows: if it's mashoch, if it's dragged down, then tmeya shecheskosi ma'kinoach. She's telling me because chazaka that it came from when she did the bdika. But if it's ogoil, if it's round, then we say no. It's probably, if it's less than the gris, then she's tired. We say it probably was this machoilus. And the Rama adds, even if it's more than the gris, as long as you could be Taylor in it, and all the other things you could be Taylor Kassim, we could rely on it. And by a mashuch, we don't care how much it is. It could be, the Alter Rebbe tells you, b'chol shehu. If it's mashuch, it's a siman, and so even b'chol shehu. And we don't say that it came from the machoilus, even though machoilus are found under the pillows, under the blankets, we still say, if it's mashuch, we say that it's tamei. Then, when it comes to same thing under the pillow, we don't say if it's round. We say you find it under the pillow. We say it's a machoilus. Now, Alter Rebbe brings you a very interesting rashba. It says in Sif Samachay the Chazake. Why is it mutter? Why is it tahor if it's an ogel less than a gris? Chazakim hoyodam kinuach mashuch hoyo. We know from before if it was coming from the body, it would have been mashuch. It wouldn't have been agul. Or lefizeh, adds the Alter Rebbe, based on the Rashba, af shehirgisha, even if she has a hargosha, when she sees this agul, amrinon hargoshas eidhu. We say it's not a real hargosha, it's a fake hargosha. And she made a toast in hargosha, it's hargosha's aid. She did a bdika, it's not a real hargosha. Therefore, even though there was hargosha, being that it's agul, we do not say that that she is tamei. We say that it's mutter. And then he says, but the Beis Yosef says that the reason is not because of dam kinuach mashuch. He says that the Beis Yosef says that being that there was no hargosha, so the glaim ladava, that it didn't come from her body. Only because there was no hargosha. And therefore, we're tailing whatever could be tailing in the kesem. So if it's round and less than the gris, we're tailing in macheles. If it's more than the gris, it's no longer a macheles. It's more than the gris. So we say, oh, you did a bdika, it's more than the gris, it's not a macheles, therefore it came from your body, back to the same nekuda, and therefore she is asur. She's tamei. And she's tumas nida midei raisa, not midei rabbanon, because midei rabbanon, ksamim is, the tumah of ksamim is tamei midei rabbanon, it's not a suffix. But over here, being that it's more than a gris, and she did a bdika, it's no longer tamei midei rabbanon, it moves back into the category of tamei midei raisa, even though there was no hargosha. Comes the Tzemach Tzedek and gives you a very interesting view on this whole topic. Tzemach Tzedek Siman Kuf Mem. Tzemach Tzedek begins this question, and he discusses this Alter Rebbe also, Bein HaDvarim. The question that Tzemach Tzedek discusses specifically this topic that we just discussed about the Rashba. It's page 231 in the white books. Siman Kuf Mem. What is it? Bodko is atzma be'ed haboduk lo. She did a bdika with eid haboduk. Ve'nichos itachas akar haniskar b'shulchan aruch siman kuf tzadik sif lamed daled. Shim ogel ve'ein boi kegris tehayra. We say that if she put it under the pillow, under the keses, and it's round and it doesn't have a gris, she's tired. We consider it like a kesem. Eich hadin bedargisha. What's the din would be if she would have hargosha? Right, that's the question of Tzemach Tzedek. So now we know, we looked at Alter Rebbe over here, that the Alter Rebbe says based on the Rashba, lefi zeh af hargisha min hargosha seidu. That's a fake hargosha. So that the Tzemach Tzedek explains to you a very important yesod over here. He says, how do we look at this question of mashuch versus agel in this scenario? He says the Gemara tells you that if it's mashuch, it's vaday migufa. Sure came from her body, therefore she's tamei. But agel is tahir. If it's round, it's tahir. That's the Gemara says. And that the Gemara doesn't tell you agel tahir because it didn't come from guf. It just says by mashuch, it's vaday migufa, therefore she's tamei. By agel, she's tahir. It doesn't tell you why. So he says, Tzemach Tzedek tells you, based mashma from the Gemara, that the whole reason why by a mashuch it's tamei is because that mashuch, that shape, is muchach devadai migufa kasi. That is a proof that it came from her body. By agel, we don't need the proof that it didn't come from the body. What we need is, we need a proof that it did come from her body to make her tamei. He says by a ogoil, we don't need that it for sure came lav megufa. We don't need lav megufa kasi. We don't need the vadai that it didn't come from her body. Farket. All we need is the only why we could be machmir by a mashuch is because we have a raya that it came from her body. And he says, Ki afilu lo yeh vadai yechocha de lav megufa kasi. Even if we don't have any proof that it did not come from her body, rather we just don't have a proof that it came We don't need a proof that it for sure didn't come from her body. As long as we don't have a proof that it for sure came from her body, yesh l'taher. Only by a mashach, because we have a chocha farker that it for sure came from her body. That's when we make it. We make her tamei. And he says a klal v'chach nir raya lazeh de kol heichod de leiko hoichocha letamei mitarim. As long as you don't have a proof farker, we make a toir by a kesem. Afsha suffix shakol, even though you have an equal suffix. Once it's a ogoil, it's not a mashuch. We have an equal suffix. There was a bdika here. We have a suffix. We know for sure that she made a bdika. So we can't say maybe she didn't make a bdika. We know for sure there was a bdika. We know for sure that this piece of cloth entered her body. We have one suffix in one side. Maybe the blood came from her body. Maybe the blood came from somewhere else. One suffix against the equal suffix. Could have come from either or. We still matter. And even if there was a hargoshe, according to Svare, we should be also matter, because in such a scenario, because we don't have a clear hoichocha that it came from her body, what difference does it make to me if there was a hargoshe or not? זה לא, זה קסומי. עכשיו זה בגדר של קסומי, עוד מעט הוא יסביר. הוא מזיז את זה מהסופק דרש, זה כבר לא סופק, זה סופק של קסומי. זה בדין של קסומי. יש הרגושה, עכשיו השאלה זה מה הגדר של הרגושה. And then further down in the Tzemach Tzedek, he continues and he says, after he explains it, he says that after he quotes over here, and he says in the next column, he says that the reason of Moshuch Tomei is Mishum de Muchacha Milsa de Migufa Kasi. It's clear that the reason is because it came from her body. That's why. That's a raya by a Moshuch that is Tomei. Aval Hoda Ogel Ter Ein Tzorich Latam. The fact that Ogel is Ter, we don't need the reason. The Muchacha Milsa de Lav Migufa Kasi. We don't need the reason that it didn't come from her body. As long as we don't have a proof, clear proof that it came from her body, we're always toile in a machoilus. And more so, even by an ogil, you could. The fact that it's ogil doesn't mean that it didn't come from the bdika. It could have come from the bdika. We don't know. Could have come from the bdika, but we don't have a clear proof that it came from the bdika. So as long as we don't have a chacham, we could be toile in the machoilas. Elad b'moshuch, when it comes to moshuch, like le'amudav, shadam kinuach. So now he says, based on that important, if you don't have a clear proof as midam kinuach, kegoin shemeroiv dakus hatipo kechadol, this drop is so tiny. You can't tell if it's moshuch or ogol. In this scenario where it was put into the box and you checked it afterwards, vaday tolina b'machoiles. We for sure are toile in the ma'acheles, because the default over here is that it's not, that it's the default over here is that as long as we don't have a proof that it's for sure from the body, we don't have a clear proof of mashuch, it automatically falls into the other category. As long as we have to have a clear proof that it's mashuch, therefore have a clear proof that it came from her body, and then we could say that it's usher. But other than that, we're not going to be oyster. So then the question is, what happens if she does argosha? All this is without argosha. But if it comes to argosha, how can you say that if you have argosha, you're still going to continue with this attitude that without a proof for sure that it came from her body, she's mutter? By argosha, maybe it's enough that maybe that's it. Maybe that is part of the eichacha. And that's where he starts in Sif Beis. He says, Mir Yishlemer calls the Shaper b'delay ergisha. because she was not margish. Therefore, talina misafik is v'machelis. After leikay chocha. Aval bedargisha mamesh. Shivashur az argosha l'chayra lo yitochen litlo yisrak be'ogel dafka diyesh chocha lo megufa kosi. If you have a hargosha, the only time you would be able to be matir is if you have a chocha verkert. Not until now we said as long as you have a chocha for it, it's mutter. Now he says, but when you have hargosha, maybe as long as you don't have a, maybe you need a chocha verkert. So by a ogoil, you do have a chocha verkert. It's round. It's less than a gris. And it was in a place where a machelis could have been. So we say that it came from the machelis. It's a chocha that didn't come from the body. But if it's not ogoil, maybe it's not moshuch, it's not clearly ogoil and less than a gris, maybe we should be machmir. And only in that scenario we say, when we have a hichocha, this is how he explains, when we have a hichocha that it's not from her body, then talina shetasa bargosha. Then we could rely on Rabbi over here b'shem Rashba. That what he writes over here in Siman Kuf Tzadik. Only then. And then he continues, v'gam al zeh herich b'kunte sachre in the Siman Kuf Peizayin lister kulozu. The Begish Shema Mashlotin Ayin Shama says, you're going to look in Kuf Peizayin, you're going to see that the Alter Rebbe, even on this, he has a kasha. So he asks even more, how can you say then that when you have a hargosha and it's not moshuch, that it should be mekel? He says you have two, as long as you don't have a chocha that it's fakeh, as long as you don't have a chocha zam kinoch, it should be mekel. How can you say that? You have a big problem. You have two sfeikus over here. First of all, he says when you don't have hargosha, then we have a suffix. Maybe it came from a body, maybe it didn't come from a body. But when you have a hargosha, it's a big raya to say that it did come from a body, because you have blood and you have a hargosha. So you say, it's a big raya to say that it did come from her body. So you can't use that suffix and say, maybe it didn't come, it's not a raya that didn't come from her body. And more so, the fact that you say Shema Argosha Seid, maybe it was a fake Argosha, a mistaken Argosha, it's also a suffix, so it will still remain a suffix. And how can you do over here, because you have Argosha, and because you don't have a raya, it might have become a suffix deraisa, suffix chorus, and how can you say it's mutter? So then the Tzemach Tzedek goes, and now he explains to you the Shittas of Rabbi Chananel, it says, and then he goes through and he says, he explains the whole swat over here. And he explains that be'etzem, over here, the tumah has nothing, it's not a suffix deiraisa. The tumah over here is a suffix, it falls into the category of a kesem. Even, but there, so he explains at length, this whole din over here is in the category of a kesem, not in the category of a bdika. We moved it from the category of a suffix deraisa to the category of a suffix derabanan, suffix samim. This whole yesod, this whole base, it's all suffix samim. Therefore, the fact that you have a hargosha still is a hargosha with a kesem. Right? So when you have a hargosha attached to a kesem, you're back to the suffix, it's a suffix derabanan. By a suffix by a derabanan. So over here, when we say the suffix, maybe the hargosha was hargosha seid, it's a emes suffix. It's not like about the deraisa that we say that it's a hargosha for sure, and then we have a suffix maybe, and we moved it into the deraisa. No, here it's a derabanan. It's a suffix by a kesem. So by a suffix and a kesem, you can't take a suffix in the din of a kesem and make it into deraisa. You can't. So therefore, once it moves into the category of a kesem, this whole din of hargosha goes back into place. If you had a hargosha, but fart it's still a kesem because we don't have a proof that it's vaday migufo. the proof from before that he says from the Gemara that it's that as long as when it's moshuch, it's a raya that it's megufa. But as long as you don't have a clear raya that it's megufa, it falls into the category of a kesem. So therefore, now that it's in the category of a kesem, the fact that it's argosha didn't add anything to move it into the category of the deraisa. It still left it in the category of the rabbanon. If it left it in the category of the rabbanon, we still could say, Safek, maybe this hargosha was a hargoshas aid, and not a hargoshas, and not a real hargosha. Therefore, it can't be fall into a deraisa. And therefore, if it's, then he continues, says, therefore, if it's round and it's more than the gris, or if it's moshuch and it's less than the gris, both of these are rayas that it came from her body. When it's moshuch less than the gris, or when it's round more than the gris under the pillow. Why? Kevon shebotkas and sifdal. Kevon shebotkas atzma boy v'gam mishechocha the megufa kasi. Being that she made a bdika, and we have a proof that it came from her body. Ein zeh bichlal dam v'lei kesem. It doesn't fall into the category of the limud that we have dam v'lei kesem. It falls actually into the category of dam. Why? Because by abdika said yeshechocha de migufa kasi. So when you have because by abdika said you have a chocha that came from her body, and in such a scenario it's no longer in dam v'lei kesem, it's dam mamish. But he says, but the leiko chocha mamish the migufa kasi. If you don't have a clear proof that it came from her body, even though this came through Bdika, Kevon sheyesh loymar, since you have the possibility of saying that it came from a kesem, shebom ma'achoyles, it came from this ma'achoyles, shtachas akar, harei ze vadei bichlal dam v'lei kesem. It goes back into the category of dam v'lei kesem, of the limud of dam v'lei kesem. It means it's a kesem. And therefore, afilu hirgisho tehoiro, v'afilu rabban lechmiru boi, and chacham are not machmir bichlal dam v'lei kesem, afilu hirgisho tehoiro. Even if she has argosha, she's still tired. Why? The loy mipnei argoshi tomei a kesem. Just because argosha, you can't move and make a kesem tomei. Kevon sheyesh loymar argosha seidhu. Because then, since we have a problem with argosha, well, we'll say it's argosha seid. The canal. Then he says, and you're going to say, well, probably came from her body. How can you say by a kesem? Still leave it in the category of a kesem. So Tzedek tells you, reminds you of a different thing in the kesem. You want to say by a kesem, when you have a probability that it came from a body, it's still asur. I remind you of something else. Sometimes the chachamim were matir a kesem when you have a clear heichoche that it came from a body, like when she sat down, botko karka olam, shein klal b'malis leis adam zulas migufo. There's no other. She sat down, karka olam, she got up, she saw blood, and we still toiler in the kesem. Afilo hachi avali b'chol dam v'lei kesem. The kol shekei b'nidin zeh, for sure in this scenario, the eicha nosen dachas akar, if it's an aid under the pillow, you can still be toiler in ma'achoyles. It's better than a scenario of Yashok of Batko Karkoilum. And the Hargosha is Hargosha Seid. Like we said before, it's not a real Hargosha. And then we could say Dam V'lei Kesem. The last 6 words of Sif Dalad are key. V'lei Domi, you can't compare Yashok Karkoilum or these or Hargosha to Moshuch. Why? The hoichoche, the moshuch, you can't compare to moshuch, right? Because the moshuch hoichoche b'mahus adam. When you look at moshuch, this is a proof in the actual dam. You look at the dam, and the dam is the one that gives you a proof where it came from. You look at the moshuch, the dam itself is giving you a proof where it came from. It's not a proof around. We're looking at the dam now. You look at the dam, it's moshuch. That is a chocha that it came from the body. If the dam is ogel, you don't have that chocha that it came from the body. You have other chochas harum. There's argoshe, there was She made a bdika, other things, but we don't have a heichocha from Mahus Hadam that this dam came from her. And therefore, since we don't have a heichocha that this dam came from her, it falls into the category of a kesem. Once it falls into the category of a kesem, the argosha, also we have to find the teretz for the argosha. The argosha was argosha said, not a real argosha.
So why began like this?
Because not a machoilis.
Is that a raya? You
No.
can't be toilet, but it's not a raya. It's
No.
the same category of...
Once, well, you can't be toilet, so she's also mimanavshach.
Okay, but from Keter, not from Nida.
From kesem, yeah.
Okay.
Kesem, yeah.
It's not the same as the Masho.
It's not the same. If you see it there, if it's more than the gris, where did it come from?
Yeah.
We say that's a raya that it came from. We say that he puts it together. He says that is a raya that it came. It's like mashuch. Because the only time we say round is not a mashuch, is not a raya, it's a machoilis, we say it's round. But now it's more than that. When it's more than the gris, it's not going to go down a straight little line. It's going to spread around. So it came from the body. This same idea of the Tzemach Tzedek goes to what the Alter Rebbe says in Kontesach, which we're going to get to, hopefully we're able to get to soon. The same idea that Tzemach Tzedek mentions mamish in 2 lines in Siman Tzadik Ches. Siman Tzadik Ches is a long tshuva about where he discusses about the dinim of Argosha, the whole beginning of the tshuva. So in Hilchos Nida, it's all about Argosha. Sif Beis, he discusses about the difference in Argosha in Meiraglaim. And in the middle of Sif Beis, on page 125 in our book, the first column towards the middle, it says, Chemar da'amrina on Argoshas Eidhu. When we throw this comment of Argoshas Eid, Yeshlemer Gamkin Pnei Cheskas Tahara. When she has a Cheskas Tahara, and then we have Argosha, and we have to find this to be Metalis Argosha, because she has a Cheskas Tahara, we keep it there. We don't take her out of a Cheskas Tahara because of this Argosha that came over here. The aid is not, you didn't see it right away, it was under the pillow. We could be machzik, we could say that this dam came from a machoilis, and therefore we say it's under the card, and it's round, it probably came from a machoilis. You have Argosha, the Argosha came as betos. Like because the round, that he brings the 2 things, because it was round, we say that it was moshuch. And then he goes into the whole discussion that's relevant over there to Meir Aglaim, if she feels, what kind of Argosha she feels. So this is what's relevant to this topic before we're going to go to the Kuntas Achrin. But I just, in Kuf Pei Zayin, I'm going to go through some points of it. Just going to go to one more Nekuda in Sa'if Lamed Daled. Just an important Alter Rebbe summarizes the points when it talks about if you have it under the car, under the pillow, and it's more than a gris. He says if yesh makim litlis boy, you could be toiler as a kesem. He just explains to you, the Alter Rebbe tells you in Sif Samach Vav what it is, Sif Sukkot Samach Vav. He says, just summarize to you, she was dealing with blood, and anything which were toiler, the ksamim in her bechaluka, were toilim also in the aid, very important klal. Once we say over here that this aid that was under the pillow has more than a gris, but it has the categories of a kasem that we could be toiler, even though we don't compare, it's an eid baduk, which is much stricter than the eid she'enei baduk, and much stricter, even more stricter than the eid meluchlach, and stricter than the chaluk, and stricter than everything else. Still, now that we took it out of the category of the eid baduk, we moved it to the category of, let's compare it to a kasem. Anything that we used for a kasem, we could use over here. Anything that we use in the chaluk to be matir, she was still matir. V'af shehoya boduk lo deraglaim ledavar hoya v'lo hirgisha, being that she did not have a hargosha with this one. V'chazok im hayadam kinuach moshuch hoya. The chazok, if there would be a dam kinuach, it would be moshuch. Now, important, hoyel v'lo yergish, over here he only brings the shitta of the Beis Yosef. Bechlal doesn't mention shitta of the Rashba. Same thing before, he brings first the Rashba, but then afterwards he brings the Beis Yosef. That's cholik, that the whole Yesod where we're mat is because there was no hargosha. So when there is hargosha, you still have a problem. Yeah, and then he discusses about, he brings the shit of the Taz. So what is this Kunter Sachen and Kuf Pei Zayin? Kunter Sachen Kuf Pei Zayin, it's Kuf Pei Zayin on Sa'if. Is that? It's on Sa'if Zayin. Kunter Sachen Yud. He starts by saying, he starts by discussing the Kunter Sachen, right? We have. He starts by discussing the Taz. The Taz over here, the Taz, he says regarding when a woman does a bdika be'eit baduk, then she puts it under the pillow, and then she finds blood. And over there we say that if it's moshuch, it's tamei, because the chazaka that it came from a kinoach. But in the ogoil, we're tahir. And he says the reason why the Taz is makel by a ogoil is similar to what we just explained in Tzemach Tzedek, is not because loy, it's not, it says the loy be'inan ogoil, ela de b'moshuch yev shalitis b'machoil. Says you don't need specifically ogoil. You don't need a specifically round shape to be able to say you're telling them achoilis. Rather, b'moshuch yev shalitis b'machoilis. By a moshuch, you can't. It's a little bit different. It's by a moshuch, you can't be telling them achoilis. So you're stuck. So you say, okay, you're tailing the body. Avol kol heichad ev misli. But as long as you could be tailer, av b'moshuch talinan. Even if it's moshuch, we'll still be tailer. Av agav du safik shakul. The midloi argesha raglaim ledover. Being that she didn't have any argoshe, we say raglaim ledover that it came from something else and did not come from her body. Only by a moshuch, and we don't have anything else to pin it on, then we say that it came from the body. Yeah, v'zeh shekosva Beis Yosef shom v'zeh atam ba'atzmai. Yeah, right. Loimer the besofik shokul talinon aval moshuch yev shalitlis, k'mash yev shalitlis migris. By a moshuch, we don't have unless we don't have a specific idea of what it to make it clear, we can't be tailing it. Then he brings the shitta of the Rashba, and this is the shitta where he says according to then he discusses it with Ezra ben Tzadok, which is also discussed in Tzemach Tzedek. So, and then he says that the Rashba, when he was matir even what the Rashba was written that it's mashma that is matir even by hargosha, even if she had a hargosha, as long as it was not moshuch, we are matir. Yeshloimad l'shitosei ozil. The Rashba goes l'shitosei. The alimolei cheskas tahara the isha letahir af mishum kesem gabe eishein neboduk af shalaroiv ein overs beichulu. Says since you have a cheskas tahara, over here explains it differently than he explains it in Kuf Tzadik, being that she has a cheskas tahara, the isha, the woman has a cheskas tahara. The cheskas tahara is stronger and it overpowers the other one. Therefore, being she has a cheskas tahara, and now we don't have the issue of moshuch, we have an issue of ogel. So we say the cheskas tahara that she has overpowers this question of the hargosha. And even though there's a hargosha, we could be toilet in hargoshas aid, even though roiv domim in that area of the body come from the body and not from a machoilus. Afal pikein, the chazaka of cheskas tahara is stronger, overpowers the other shaila, and therefore we have hargosha. We say it's hargosha said. Is hargosha said, and then the Alter Rebbe concludes that whatever, regardless of how we explain the day of the Rashba, the Beis Yosef and the Ramah are clear that a bdika that was put under the pillow is dino kekesem lisleis b'chol davar shetelim bekesem. Anything which would be mekel in a kesem will be mekel in this bdika that's under the pillow that was put away. Because once that was put over there, as long as we don't have a proof for kert, we keep it in the category of a kesem. And then Alter Rebbe discusses this. The same thing is v'im ken hu adin l'maka sheni yadasim mitzi adam. If you have a makkah that you're not sure if it takes out blood or not. Yeah, based on that, and he says again, but then he discusses the whole din of a makkah. There's a difference if a makkah is moitzidam, if you do it, the makkah is moitzidam, is not moitzidam, machlekes taz and shach. That you can't say that the makkah that is a suffix, if it's moitzidam or not, is similar to a kesem. Rather, he says, but if as long as it's in the category of a kesem, keep the makkah aside. As long as in the category of a kesem, we will be mekel on anything which is a category of a kesem. Once this is no longer mashuch, if it's not mashuch, it's no longer in the category of a kesem, we're mekel on the kesem. We're talking about hargosha. That ends up being, if according to the Rashba, even with hargosha, it's fine because we say hargosha said. From the Beis Yosef, it's mashma that the whole reason we're matter is because there is no hargosha, and not because if there was hargosha, we have a problem. And the Tzemach Tzedek doesn't mention Bichlal, the Kimat doesn't mention the Shita. The Beis Yosef focuses mostly on the Rashba, takes that approach and explains that once you put it into the category of a kesem, you do follow by the hargosha. But don't rush the paskin according to the Tzemach Tzedek, because the Tzemach Tzedek, after he discusses and he farentfers a little bit what Alter Rebbe writes in Kuntesachin over here, he ends with Tzarich Iyun. Doesn't leave it like that Lamaisa. After he explains it, but it's important to know, in case one day you're stuck with such a situation, that at least the Tzemach Tzedek is there if you need to use them.
What if there's a hargosha not when she's doing bdika? What if there's a hargosha when she's not doing bdika?
She has to do a bdika there. Separately.
She has a hargosha and then she does a bdika. You can't say it's a hargosha state.
If she does a hargosha and then she does a bdika later, and she doesn't find anything on the bdika, or she finds maratar, or what she do?
She puts it under her pillow. She finds it the next day.
Then you have a bigger problem. L'chayre, you'd have a problem. If it's moshach, for sure it's a problem. If it's ogel, we have to see. Still can't, I can say that hargosha is the one that came to it. It's a svara, I don't know. Can't say. Seder.